Thukral, is he there? Yes. Rohit Lal, good. Satish Kutti, good. Chandrasekhar, Rajesh Malhotra, Nilesh Hirikhan, Vijay Kumar, okay. Deepak Gautam, good. And Sumit Parya. Okay. So good morning. I mean, it's early morning and I find that I and only the speakers are there. Anyway, we have to get along. So I'll request the first speaker, Rajiv Thukral, to give his talk on salvage hip arthroplasty for failed trochanteric fracture fixations, result of cementless distal fixation femoral stems. Rajiv, please. I'll request you to kindly stick to time.
Thank you, sir. Of course, this is going to be a very personalized talk, so I'll try to be a little bit more general. Here I'm going to talk today about salvage hip arthroplasty for failed DHS or any form of trochanteric fixation. In our case, of course, this is a DHS. And the results of the cementless distal fixation stem. We know that the problems really of failed intertrochanteric fractures are that the DHS can fail by many mechanisms, and then after that, revising that, fixing it again, which is the ideal thing to do, has got a lot of risks. You may cause more damage to the abductor mechanism, and anyways it's destroyed. There is a high risk of dislocation happening. There is bleeding, and many times you don't have enough host bone on which to sit your implant. So conversion is necessary a few times. So this study basically was done to study the results of a distal fix hip system in a consecutive series. So it's really a series, a case series. It's not a prospective or a randomized study. And is to identify whether there were any specific complications and to compare our results with those published in literature. That's the aim of the study. These are methods. It's a consecutive case series of 49 patients with 49 hip fractures. The DHS failure cause has been enumerated out there. We use the anterolateral approach predominantly, and sometimes we had to use a transtrochanteric approach or the split trochanteric approach. A total hip was done in the majority of our patients. Bipolar, where we found that the patient was either too old or did not have sufficient wear in the acetabulum side. The implants use a solution stem and the Duralock Pinnacle cup. Abductor repair was carried out in all patients with either stainless steel wiring or additional Ethibond sutures. And we always use the head that was excised as a bone graft, either a mosselized form or cut into a sliver so as to be recreating the calcar. So this is an example of what we used to do, just to show you a 61-year-old female with the long distal fixation stem. And you can see that the trochanteric area has been wired. Even though it's gone into a non-union, it is still functional. There's no complaint. This is another patient with the same. Right, so assessment was done perioperatively and post-operatively, specifically to look for any intraoperative complications, the surgical time, the blood loss, transfusions, the duration of hospitalization, the weight-bearing status, and follow up clinically as well as radiologically on the basis of scores. This is the results in a chart in patients. You can see on the side that also a bifurcation of the total hips and the bipolars. Where patients had a high ASA grade 3 and 4, we preferred the bipolar because you would reduce the bleeding time and reduce the perioperative complications. Unless, of course, the acetabular cartilage was destroyed, where we had to do total hip. And the failure mode also has been described. These are the results. Perioperatively, you see the mean operative time is about 66 minutes. It is actually sufficiently lower than what we have seen reported by many other people in literature. The mean intraoperative blood loss also was low. However, the total blood loss inclusive of the drain would come to about 600 to 700 ml. And we normally ended up with giving half of our patients more than 2 units of blood transfusion. The complications intraoperatively seen one fracture distally and one dislocation which happened immediately post-operative, as you can see in the x-rays down below. The hospitalization was for an average for a week, but ranging to up to 3 weeks in a particular patient, and full weight bearing was allowed at 2 months. 3 patients were lost to follow-up. There was 1 death to a medical cause, myocardial infarct happening at about 6 months post-op. So we had a total of 45 patients available for final follow-up, and you can see these are the results here. The hip scores improved from a pre-op of 34 average to a post-op of 82, which is a pretty good result as a whole group. And the pain score also dramatically dropped. The satisfaction score was high. It was higher with the total hip group. And we had complications, of course. This is a surgery which is known to have complications. You can see here, had 1 case of a deep infection in both of the bipolar and total hip group, of which 1 actually needed a surgery, a washout, whereas no dislocation happened in the post-operative period, in the long-term, more than 3 months post-operative period. We had 2 cases of SEM subsidence and 2 cases of trochanteric non-union, with an overall complication rate, as you can see down there, of about 16%. And resurgery for any cause was only seen in 1 patient. So that is a good news. Even though we had trochanteric non-union, that particular patient refused, or the 2 patients did not go for surgery or did not want surgery. So just to summarize, this is the total hips that we had. The follow-up was about 5 years, which is a good follow-up. And the mean modified Harris hip score improved from a pre-op of 28 to a post-op of 82. We had about 89% of good or excellent results as measured by the Harris hip score, with 5 poor results. And these were patients who had the complications, as you have noticed downstairs. Total hip has been proven time and again to be an effective salvage procedure, and there have been reports of up to 78% of good and excellent results on the basis of Harris hip scores. Definitely shown in numerous reports to have better results than the bipolar, as you can see. These are all the last 4-year papers only, nothing before that. Though it is technically challenging and it has got a high rate of intraoperative and postoperative complications, there are ways and there are methods to minimize these complications. In the older patient, it is definitely more indicated, and that would be one of the feedback messages I would like to give to the audience. So this is a little bit research on the complications available. You can see that using long femoral stems that bridges the previous holes and defects may actually be a particularly good way to reduce the risk of intra or postoperative fracture. We know that the rate of complications is high, so we must rule out a pre-existing infection in the patients. We must send gram stains and cultures intraoperatively and start on the appropriate antibiotics. Osteolysis and loosening may be seen in some patients, but they are not causes for concern. This is the final
Rajiv,
chart.
you've crossed it, please.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay,
Thanks a
so-
lot. I'm sure all of you agree he's given a good solution for a salvage, minimally invasive, direct NT approach, hip replacements. I'll give you time. If we have time, I'll give you time for questions. How are you?
Good morning, gentlemen. This is my talk on the direct anterior approach to the hip. And this study was done in SportsMed, Australia, Adelaide, Australia, where I was doing my fellowship in arthroplasty and arthroscopic surgeries from the 12th to 31st July 2013. Under the guidance and supervision of Dr. Anthony Spriggins, who was the hip and knee surgeon there.
Hospital, Deepak Memorial, Pushpandri Crossway, and Karuna.
Now going back to the direct anterior approach. Now this is the same Smith-Peterson approach, where the interval is between the tensor fascial adder and sartorius, and then there's the reflected head of rectus femoris, which is overlying the capsule. We have to dissect that out, and the capsule is directly visible. Traction table we used, designed by Dr. Stephen Klusner, who's a hip surgeon in Dallas, Texas. The traction table was an arc table, which allowed hyperextension, adduction, and external rotation. The incision was 3 centimeters below and behind the ASIS, and it was usually 8 centimeters long. That's the usual incision we took. Now, the approach does not cut any muscle. It's the internervous plane through which we reach the capsule of the hip joint. The leg length is measured using pins inserted on the anteroinferior iliac spine. Potential advantages: no muscles cut, hence better rehabilitation of the patient, less blood loss, posterior structures remain intact. Now, this was a paper, this is a review of in review of literature, which said mean hospital, which actually said about the mean hospital stay being shorter and the days of mobilization being less. Now, our study was a prospective study starting in January 2012, done by the same surgeon, Tony Spriggins, and functional outcome was evaluated with Oxford hip score and short form 36. 47 primary total hip replacements, 23 were done by posterior approach, 24 anterior approach, average BMI 27. All were done by supine, by placing the patient supine. And these were the parameters we evaluated: the surgical time, the blood loss, any major complication, the cup inclination for accuracy of this procedure, length of hospital stay. Functional outcome was again evaluated using Oxford hip score and short form 64. Now, the surgical time is not significantly greater than posterior approach, means the surgical time was similar, but the surgical time was improving with each surgery, as you can see from this graph, the trend line. There was less blood loss. There was less blood loss with the anterior approach, but there was no significant difference in the post-op drainage. There was less blood transfusion. The mean units transferred in anterior approach was 1.4 compared to the posterior approach, which was 1.8 units. There was no major complication. Comparing these two data, there was mild wound ooze in 2 patients, and there was no significant leg length discrepancy in anterior approach. There was 1 patient with clunking of hip, and there was 1 hip subsidence at 6 months. The cup inclination, again, this was used for accuracy, was similar to what we had using the posterior approach. But the leg length discrepancy was better. The average leg length discrepancy was only 2 millimeters as compared to the posterior approach, which was 7 millimeters. There was no significant difference in the duration of hospital stay, mainly because of the attitude of all of us. What are the known complications? Now, this was again a paper which actually said about the complication rate being higher with anterior approaches, and their study, the complication rate was actually 16.4% of patients. Now, but the learning curve with anterior approach is well documented. It's a difficult approach, and it takes time to master this approach. Now, there's another paper which said that the blood loss was greater. In their study, the blood loss was greater with the anterior approach. Now, coming to the functional outcome, hip score and outcome measures. Now, the hip score with anterior approach was, in our study, was much better than the posterior approach, average being 21. And even the short form 36, the scores were better with the physical component score for, as well as the mental component score in our study. So it does compare with the studies done earlier. So summarizing the results of our study, it's actually 23 hips. There were no major complications in our study. The operating time was similar to the posterior approach, but it's getting better with each surgery. There was less blood loss and less requirement for blood transfusion. It's a good surgery in terms of leg length and acetabular inclination. And we had excellent Oxford hip scores as well as short form 36 scores at 6 months follow-up. The physical score is better than posterior approach. The hospital stay not reduced, mainly because of the attitude of the surgeons. So summarizing everything, it was an excellent technique, and we continue to realize better outcomes. And this is just a preliminary study, and it's just a 6-month study, which I did while I was there in Adelaide. And I think anterior approach is a good approach. Learning time, there's a definite learning curve with the anterior approach.
Thank you, Rohit.
Thank you.
For your presentation. Now, I have Dr. Ambud Srivastava with me as the chairperson. I'll request him to carry forward.
Our next speaker is Dr. Satish Kutti.
Thank you, Chairman. Just presenting my study that I did in my hospital and along with Professor Grappiolo in Milan. Where I work is in Harlow, which is just north of London, and this is Humanitas, where I did most of my work. There's some work from my hospital too, which I've included in the study. So we know that the Crowe type 4 high dislocation has secondary osteoarthritis related to it late down the line. And it's often a very challenging operation. Why? Because we know the acetabulum is very hypoplastic. We know the femoral canal is very narrow, and often the proximal femur has got huge anteversion issues. The soft tissue is very contracted, and they have previous implants or operations making life very challenging and difficult. So the hip replacement in dysplastic patients, especially high dislocations, there have been results by various authors using modular components, sometimes monoblock, cemented, combining with an osteotomy, and often using skeletal traction pre-op. And these are some of the studies which have been published recently. And what we wanted to show was the usefulness of using a monoblock tapered fluted stem. And this is the Wagner cone, which was introduced in 1990 initially. Professor Wagner implanted first, and then in 92 it became available for mass consumption. And then it's gradually changed in 2006, where you can see the shoulders become more of a square, and you have two different angles to compensate for current anatomy. So we've included both these stems in the study. So this is mostly a retrospective study, but there was some prospective patients from my study which I've included in this. So we've included all the high dislocations. There were about 84 hips in 50 patients. Majority of them were bilateral, and the majority of them were females, as expected. Sorry. All these patients had a subtrochanteric shortening osteotomy. The acetabular component was placed in the anatomic hip center, and there was a combination of cemented and uncemented. The femoral component was universally the Wagner cone, and this is a monoblock titanium alloy, which is tapered and fluted. It's got numerous advantages in stress shielding. So the approach was usually posterior, and the surgeons were either Professor Spotorno, who introduced the CLS stem, followed by his prodigy Grappiolo and myself. The acetabular component varied, as I mentioned previously, and all patients had a follow-up examination, followed by Harris hip score and up-to-date radiographs. So the radiographic assessment included component migration, loosening, osteotomy site complications, heterotrophic ossification, stress shielding, and the notes for look for any complications. So the mean age for these patients was 51, and the mean follow-up was 8 years, which is pretty good. And we were able to get majority of them. There were 6 follow-up patients which were lost, unfortunately. So worst case scenario, 93% were available. 6 patients had early complications, and I'll come to them later on. And the mean Harris hip score improved from 42 to 88, which was fairly good in the age group. And the complications essentially were heterotrophic ossification in 2 patients, 3 patients had acute dislocation which was corrected and did not have subsequent dislocations. There was a delayed non-union of the osteotomy site, 1 osteotomy failure which needed to be plated, and 1 deep wound infection which needed to be debrided. But the stem didn't have to be changed. In terms of the stem, there was absolutely no change in position, shielding, or loosening, which is excellent. So this is a technique that I'm going through what we did, and this was what I was taught by Professor Hartofilakidis in Athens. And this is his slide, and he essentially says that this is what you should do, and this is what you shouldn't do, which I don't agree, because I think this is a far more forgiving operation when you compare it to what he does, and he uses cemented components. So this is a patient of mine, she's 37. She presented like this with severe pain, and I did a staged hip replacement. So started off on the right side, and you can see that we've identified the true acetabulum, placed the acetabulum in the true hip center, followed by a subtroch osteotomy, used the cut ends of the osteotomy as a graft, prepared and wrapped the graft around the osteotomy. So with the osteotomy was done staged, and till we were happy that we were able to reduce the hip. So this is the final result at 3 years, and she was just seen last month, and you can see that the osteotomy side has healed very well, and the bone graft has taken quite well too. On the left, not so much in the right, but still pretty good for 3 years. She's extremely happy with the results. Now this is the lady that was done 20 years ago. She was 54 years old when she had that operation, and this is a 20-year follow-up. She's had a couple of acetabular revisions, but the femoral component has not changed. And this is the other technique that now Professor Grappiolo uses. I use the osteotomy side bone graft and cable, but he uses a wire around to stabilize, and the osteotomy usually heals very well. Some of the complications: the osteotomy failed in the first patient, which needed to be plated, acute dislocations, heterotrophic ossification, and delayed union of the osteotomy site. So in summary, the success rate of these patients is excellent if you use this type of monoblock tapered fluted stem. And with the osteotomy, it does do extremely well. Yes, there are some complication rates, but the overall outcome remains very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Satish. It was a nice talk. And is Dr. Chandrasekhar here, please? Dr. Rajesh Malhotra? Dr. Nilesh? Rajesh, please.
Respected chairpersons, my teachers and my colleagues, myself Nilesh Irekan from SN Medical College, Jodhpur. I am presenting the paper entitled Comparison of Total Hip Replacement with Femoral Head Size 28 mm and 36 mm. Introduction. The successful reconstruction of the arthritic hips by total hip replacement was the most innovative and significant development in orthopedic surgery during last century. In spite of recent developments, it's not free of complications. Instability being the most common indication for revision surgeries. In 1958, Sir John Charles aggressively pursued effective methods of replacing both femoral head and acetabulum, and he developed a conceptual low friction orthoplasty. He used 22 mm head. Muller in 1970 further developed the Charles joint. This design used 32 mm head size instead of 22 mm and a banana shaped stem, allowing easy insertion without the need of trochanteric osteotomy. Many studies were done comparing the head size 22 mm and 32 mm. Kelly et al. Noted an increased dislocation rate with 22 mm heads as compared to the 32 mm heads. Few found no significant difference in dislocation rate between the 22 mm and 32 mm femoral heads. Dislocation is one of the most common complications of total hip orthoplasty. Many factors including demographic, operative and implant design variables have been demonstrated or proposed to affect the risk of dislocation. Femoral head diameter is one of the most important operative variable under the control of surgeon that might affect dislocation rate. It has been postulated that larger femoral head diameters reduce the risk of dislocation because they improve the head to neck ratio, which increases the range of motion of the prosthetic components without prosthetic impingement. a greater amount of translation of the femoral head is required before dislocation occurred. That is, the jump distance is increased. There may be a greater soft tissue resistance to dislocation as the femoral head is better contained by the surrounding soft tissue envelope. The larger femoral head, though, has been associated with increased amount of volumetric wear. Also, larger femoral head is associated with increase in fixture torque, which is implicated in loosening of the cemented components. Aims and objectives. The aims and objectives of the study were as follows: to compare the early results of total hip replacement using the femoral head size 28 mm and 36 mm, to discuss the merits and demerits of total hip replacement in both the groups. The present study was conducted in the Department of Orthopedics, Dr. SN Medical College and Associated Group of Hospitals, Jodhpur. Following categories of patients were, with various disorders of hip requiring total hip replacements were included in the present study. The study was carried out on 50 hips in 42 patients of total hip replacement. The head size 28 mm group had 25 and the 36 mm group had 25, with ages 25 to 60 years between the 2009 to 2013. This was a retrospective as well as prospective study. Patient follow-up was for a minimum of 6 months to maximum of 54 months. Information on the patient was compiled from clinical details, case files and OT records. All patients underwent either cemented or uncemented or hybrid THR using posterolateral approach. Most of them were uncemented THR. All patients were encouraged to stand on the second post-op day. Low molecular weight heparin was given for 5 days post-operatively. Post-operative clinical evaluation was done for range of motion, limb length and any other complications. Follow-up was done every 6 weekly for the first 6 months, then after every 3 months. Evaluation was done using modified Harris-Hip score and radiological assessment at every follow-up. At every follow-up, patients were specifically inquired about the dislocation or any other complications. Results. The mean modified Harris-Hip score, mean pre-operative Harris-Hip score in 28 mm group and 35 and in 36 mm group it was 33. Post-operatively the Harris-Hip score improved in both the groups and were 88 and 94 respectively. The difference in the post-operative Harris-Hip score is mostly because of the functional activity and the range of motion. The limb length discrepancy was seen. More than 1 centimeter limb lengthening was seen in 3 patients in 36 mm group and in 1 patient in 28 mm group. Radiographic evaluation. In both the femoral and acetabular, there was no evidence on X-ray suggestive of loosening of the femoral or acetabular components in both the groups. Complications. In 28 mm group, 1 patient had dislocation post-operatively. It was treated conservatively by close manipulation under anesthesia and image intensifier and immobilization for 3 weeks. Instructions were given not to flex hip more than 90 degree and not to adduct or internally rotate the limb. No dislocations were found in the 36 mm group. No other complications like infection, deep vein thrombosis, periprosthetic fracture or nerve injuries were found in either groups. Clinical photographs and X-rays. This is the pre-op X-ray of 1 patient with bilateral affection. This is the post-op X-ray with dislocation. This is the post-op X-ray of the same patient after bilateral THR. This is the pre-op X-ray of 1 patient. Clinical photograph of the same patient and the post-op X-ray. This is the pre-op X-ray of another patient. Clinical photograph post-operatively and the post-op X-ray. This is the post-op X-ray of 1 patient with cemented acetabular component. Conclusion. There was 1 episode of dislocation in 28 mm group, whereas no dislocations in 36 mm group. Slightly better final modified IS was found in 36 mm group as compared to the 28 mm group. No radiological signs of osteolysis or losing in either group. To conclude, difference in the dislocation rate is not significant and large study is needed to compare the dislocation rate. 36 mm group patient had better scores in functional activity and range of motion, and the patient satisfaction was more in the 36 mm group patients. These are the references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nilesh. Our next speaker is Dr. Vijay Kumar. Dr. Vijay Kumar is here. He'll be speaking on restoration of hip biomechanics following bringing a mid-head dissection.
Good morning, chairpersons and your audience. Well, I'm going to speak on Birmingham mid-head resection. Well, this implant was introduced for young patients. The basic aim was to have an implant which was bone conserving as well as bone preserving. And in this was somewhere in between a resurfacing and a THR, and the osteotomy is done in the middle of the head. And the implant is by Smith and Nephew, and you have a short stem which goes into the neck and a large anatomic head which articulates with a BHR cup. In short, the surgical technique involves steps which are similar to a BHR. However, you do a resection in the middle of the head and you prepare the femoral neck for the insertion of a cementless stem. Well, the aim of this study was very simple. We just wanted to evaluate whether a mid-head resection using a BMHR could restore the biomechanics of hip, especially with respect to femoral offset and limb length. Well, this BMHR prosthesis was done at AIIMS in 2009 to 2011, and we had a cohort around 58 patients, of which we only took patients who had a unilateral disease with a normal opposite hip. So we had around 24 patients, of which 19 were male and 5 females with a mean age of 37 years. These were quite young patients. And clearance was taken from the AIIMS Ethics Committee for the study. Standard preoperative templating was done for the cup as well as for the stem as well as for the level of osteotomy. Posterior approach was used in all patients with standard antibiotic prophylaxis. Tranexamic acid and Clexane was used in all cases. The cup was a BHR cementless cup, and the cementless femoral stem was placed in the center of the neck parallel to the axis of the femoral neck. We did radiographs preoperatively and at 3 months postoperatively to evaluate for component positioning as well as to evaluate for the offset and the stem femoral shaft angle in the post-op X-rays. Any difference of more than 5 degrees as compared to the preoperative nerve shaft angle was taken as valgus or varus positioning. In the preoperative evaluation, we took a line in the center of the axis of the femoral shaft and measured the femoral offset from the center of the femoral head and the cup offset from the teardrop and the limb length from the interteardrop line and the neck shaft angle. And the post-op X-ray, we measured the same variables, the femoral offset, the cup offset, the sum of these was taken as the total offset, and the limb length restoration as well as the neck stem shaft angle and the inclination of the cup. A PRT test as well as the Fisher-Exert test was used for statistical analysis. Coming to the results, the average vestibular inclination was around 43 degrees. The stem shaft angle was around 140 degrees. The stem were in neutral position in 18 hips, whereas there were 5 hips which were in valgus, around 5 degree of valgus in 4 and 10 degree of valgus in 1 and a varus in single hip. Comparison of offset between the operator and contralateral hip found that there was no statistical significant difference between the cup offset as well as total offset. However, the femoral offset was restored to within 3 mm of the contralateral hip in 15 of the 24 hips. And it varied by, there was a difference in the statistical significant difference in the femoral offset between the operator hip and the contralateral hip. On subgroup analysis, we found the stems which had been put in a neutral position, means around 18 stems. Of this, only 4 had offset difference of more than 4 mm, which was significant. However, if the stem was malpositioned in valgus or varus, 5 of the 6 stems had offset difference of more than 4 mm. So valgus or varus positioning of stem showed statistically significant association with the offset difference of 4 mm or more. Valgus positioning resulted in a reduction of offset as compared to a varus positioning. As far as limb length is concerned, when the stem was in a neutral position, around 18 stems, of this only 2 stems had a limb length discrepancy of more than 5 mm, whereas if it was malpositioned, 5 out of 6 stems had a limb length discrepancy of more than 5 mm. An example, in a neutral position, the offset could be restored as well as the limb length, whereas if you put the stem in a valgus position, you had a slight lengthening of the limb as well as a slight decrease in the femoral offset. Well, restoration of hip biomechanics, especially with regard to offset and limb length, is one of the goals of hip arthroplasty. Inaccurate restoration may affect the function and survival of a hip arthroplasty, affecting the hip abductor length and wear rate. To our knowledge, this is the only study which assessed the offset and limb length restoration after mid-head resection. When we compared the results with respect to restoration of biomechanical parameters, as they were seen to be as good or better than the results that have been reported with the THR or hemi-replacement arthroplasty. And we found that when we had a non-neutral positioning of femoral component, there was a difference in offset of more than 4 mm, and a limb length discrepancy of more than 5 mm with a non-neutral positioning of a femoral stem. The limitation of this study was we did not study the intra and inter-observer variability. This was not taken into account. And the study also lacked a comparison group in form of a cohort of patients with THA done at the institute. To conclude, neutral position of a BMHR stem accurately restore the biomechanical parameters, whereas if we put it in a valgus position, it results in an increase in limb length and a reduction in femoral offset. So one needs to take into account the benefit of placing the femoral component in valgus with regard to protective effect on neck. Notching needs to be balanced against a reduction in femoral offset that could result in an increase in wear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vijay. I believe you finished well in time. May I now request Dr. Deepak Gautam to come over and give his talk on bone mineral density around femoral component in patients implanted with Birmingham mid-head resection prosthesis. Dr. Deepak, please.
Good morning, everybody. The assessment of bone mineral density around proximal femoral component in patients who have been implanted with Birmingham mid-head resection prosthesis. Continuing efforts have been made to improve the long-term stability and clinical results of total hip arthroplasty. They have resulted in various approaches to design and fixation, all with their inherent advantages and disadvantages. Well, it is said that people will believe anything when you say scientists have discovered that. But does this always hold true? Mid-head resection arthroplasty was developed as an alternative to total hip arthroplasty in young adults with theoretical advantage of preserving the proximal femoral bone stem. What it is claimed that the Birmingham mid-head resection is a device that conserves the bone. But is it necessary that conserve is always equal to preserve? Theoretically, it is said that the device has the potential to physiologically lower the proximal femur, particularly due to retention of the base of the femoral head, which allows the conical stem to lower the proximal femur. But till date, no study had been conducted to assess the bone mineral density around the proximal femoral component who have been implanted with this device. So with the aim of to quantify the changes in bone mineral density in proximal femur in patients who have been implanted with Birmingham mid-head resection prosthesis using DEXA scan, a approval was taken from the Institute Ethics Committee for all sample size of 50 years. The patients who had undergone BMHR arthroplasty were evaluated clinically and through serial DEXA scans at 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year and 2 years postoperatively. The patients who had undergone BMHR arthroplasty were evaluated clinically and through serial, The proximal femur was divided into 4 regions of interest and the bone mineral density were assessed in each quadrant. We had divided the proximal femur into 4 quadrants. R1, the region which lies medial to the stem, or say the inferior neck. R2, the region that is just lateral to the stem, or say the superior neck. R3 is the trochanteric region, and R4 is the region distal to the stem. There were total 58 patients were operated in 74 hips, of which 51 were male and 7 were female. Maximum number of patients were in the age group 31 to 40 years, with male mean age 36.12 years and female 39.28 years. But there was no statistical significant difference between two genders. Most of the patients were of ankylosing spondylitis with hip involvement followed by avascular nephrosis of the femoral head. In clinical evaluation, the mean Harris hip score was significantly increased from the perioperative value of 38.01 to 85 at 6 months and 91.65 at 1 year. The overall increase in Harris hip score was compared to the perioperative value was statistically significant. However, the p-value on comparing the mean Harris hip score at 1 year and 2 years was not statistically significant. Now coming to the bone mineral density in each region, in region 1, that is the inferior neck, the bone mineral density was first decreased for 3 months, then after it gradually increased at 6 months and then 1 year and 2 years. However, in region 2, the bone mineral density decreased at 3 months and then started toward the base level at 6 months and with a slight decrease at 1 year and 2 years. In region 3, the bone mineral density increased after the initial decrease in 3 months. Whereas in the 4, with the initial decrease in the 3 months, it again started increasing. And the net BMD was also increasing at the last. On comparison, it was found that there was a decrease in bone mineral density in all the regions at 3 months after the surgery. However, at 6 months, the bone mineral density in the region showed an increasing values towards the baseline. At 1 year follow-up, it was seen that the bone mineral density increased in regions R1 and R4, where it was almost same in region R2 and R3. At 2 years follow-up, there was a positive change in BMD in the region R1, the BMD raised in both R3 and R4 as well. We also found that the bone mineral density value of the region R4 was maximum and R3 was the least of all. In statistical analysis, there was no significant change over the period of time in R1, R2, R3 and R4 with p-values less than 0.05. In complication, 1 patient had fractured neck of the femur within 6 months of the surgery and 2 patients had infection. The one who had fractured neck of the femur had to be revised with the other longer stem but cup remaining the same. Of the 2 patients who had infection, one did all with the debridement and heart, while the other had to go implant immobile. Studies on hip resurfacings I have divided the proximal femur into 3 zones on the medial, 3 zones in the lateral, and 1 distal. But while reporting, most of them had culminated all those 3 regions into 1 and all those 3 regions lateral into 1 and ultimately into 3. This would correspond to our study R1, R2 and R4 regions, while the R3, the trochanteric region is different. No, it's, the BMD was decreased at the first 3 months. It's widely accepted that BMD of the proximal femur generally decreased after THA, mainly due to the stress related remodeling and time taken for osteointegration during the early posterior period, and partly due to patient related factors like decreased mobility in the immediate posterior period. During the first 3 months, our patients were allowed to touch mobilization only with the help of walker. After 3 months, they underwent gradual transition from partial to full load bearing, at which time the BMD is seen to be increasing towards the baseline. First HMRs had also reported that this initial temporary decline of BMD is thought to be caused by the impact of surgery and the decrease of activity during convalescence. But however, the BMD increased after 6 months to 1 year. If the BMD of R1, R3 and R4 reached at least the preoperative level or even exceeded it by the end of 1 year, it supports that bone debleeding during the 1 year follow-up. At the end of 2 years, our study showed that BMD of R1 is increasing. It replicates the physiological stress transfer in an unreplaced tip where most of the weight transfer is through the medial aspect of the neck. R1 would correspond to the growing zone 1 for THR, which is known to suffer stress swelling after THR. We can emphasize that increase in BMD in medial calcareous region is a positive aspect of the BMHR as this replicates physiological stress transfer. But there is the BMD in the R2 was less than that of R1. No, if it is to probe, it may be due to stress swelling or probably the vital exposition which is preferred to notching. Even the finite element analysis and biomechanical studies with resurfacing also have proven the same thing. In R4, its least to decrease at 3 months quickly attain the baseline value and even exceeded later. Maybe due to physiological loading and there is no stress shielding due to BMHR. In R3, it is least of all the regions. Considering the minor errors even after metal subtraction, the cancellous bone of the greater trochanter will appear less dense than that of the neck with the metal implant. So there are several literatures, not in BMHR, but in the resurfacing and BHR, which have lastly concluded that after an early drop, the BMD of the proximal femur was restored to even exceeded the preoperative level. But the matter of concern, what many people are thinking regarding the devices of the metal lines. BMHR may also attain the problems associated with the metal line bearings. But does this mean that BMHR is simply equal to MHR plus MOM? But let us think in a different word. But it's a mid-head resection where Birmingham was a device to develop, and unfortunately it was a more metal articulation. But it has not left the room for other alternate bearings within short stems. So to conclude, the neck is conserved and the head is anatomically replaced. The medial resection preserves the bone mineral density around the proximal femur, and hence conservation is preservation. However, long-term follow-up studies are necessary to see whether this benefit is bone conservation sustains over longer period time periods. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Deepak. Well in time. May I now request Dr. Rajesh Malhotra
from Delhi, but it was a bad day. And thank you for accommodating me. I am going to talk about our experience with the trabecular metal cup cage. And basically, when you talk about management options in type 3B Peprosky, the options are quite limited. And classically, we have been forced to use allograft and conventional cages, and this is what it is, just to introduce you to the fact that there is severe superior and inferior destruction, there is no rim support for the cup, and there is likely pelvic discontinuity in many of these cases. And this is classically how I used to treat these, and this is a case of Peprosky 3B, and we would take out the implant and put in a cage, put a lot of graft underneath. So this was built up for the graft, but eventually this rested on the cement. The problem was this was an unbiological or non-biological solution, so these cages used to fail within the next 5 to 7 years. That led to the search for better options such as the uncemented cup, structural allograft, porous metal augments, column plating. That has been very common at places where there is the allografts are not available, to put 1 or 2 column plates, and then cup cage construct, but you can also use a tri-flange type of cup. Now the trabecular metal technology has been available in India, and now this is really, the cup cage remains a very innovative technique, as I am going to show, and this is the armamentarium which is used. So the objective of this study was to evaluate the results of cup cage constructs for acetabular revision or acetabular reconstruction at our center. 10 cases were seen. Actually there were 9 of failed total hip and 1 of acetabular fracture, and they were used for severe deficiency. We used a trabecular metal cup cage construct between 2007 and 2009. The 6 cases were following infection, the 4 were non-infected or aseptic. The indication for cup cage was that whenever you thought there was a severe bone deficiency, and we tried to put in the trabecular metal cup and found that primarily it was not stable, it was supplemented with a cage. Now that ensured that the trabecular metal cup was stable in the socket. So acetabulum was exposed, acetabular defects were analyzed, the morcellized bone and structural grafts were used wherever required, hip center was identified, and then you size the acetabulum, put the trabecular metal cup, and then put a shell on top of it. And this is the various steps, so acetabular preparation, and then you get purchased into whatever bone is available for you there. You can actually drill your own holes if you like. This is just easy to drill with the normal drill bit, and then you put this cage, and then you cement a cup, and that's the time when you really can orient the cup according to your convenience. It doesn't matter if the stem gets in between the cup and the cage, and that is, and you don't have to bottom the cage out in the cup. And this is how the cup placement was done in all these cases, and the acetabular liner was put in, and we use a cementless femoral stem in all these patients and followed these patients clinically and radiologically. The average age was quite elderly. These were 66 years of age, between 62 to 74. There were 8 males and 2 females. You could follow them for an average of 3 years, and you can see these were the demographics, and Harris-Hip score average improved from 34 point pre-operatively to 76 points at the final follow-up. We saw consolidation of graft in all cases, no migration, no loosening, no osteolysis. The cage was quite well osseointegrated, as I'm going to show, and the stems were all stable. Now this is a classical example of one non-arthroplasty case, but the idea was to show you the kind of bony defects which can be managed. This was a bad acetabular fracture case. You can see this is a Paprosky 3B type of defect, and that kind of patient is not at all unusual in our setting. And this is how it looked. We left the hardware which was not coming in the way, and this is a trabecular metal shell with the cage in place, and you can see that the hip center has been restored and the biomechanics is back to normal. This was an example of other kind where we did it for an infected case in the second stage. This is a patient, the cup was right in the acetabulum. We took out everything, put a nail. We couldn't put a spacer because that would have gone inside as well. And again the same thing, put the trabecular metal shell, and if it is not stable, then you have to augment it with a cage there. And this is how it was, and you can see during the follow-up what we have seen is we have started forming too much of bone actually here, and this patient also received a proximal femoral allograft. The complication, only one which we saw, was there was too much bone in 2 cases. The problem in pelvic discontinuity is that there is a poor bone stock which creates problems about fixing your acetabular component into the bone, the problem about union if there is a discontinuity, and then the stability of the fixation as well as stability of the hip implant or hip replacement which you have put in. Now we can use this kind of construct for addressing the massive defects. It restores the anatomical center of the hip, provides stability, and then the purpose of the cage is to keep the cup stable till the time it gets osseointegrated. The low modulus of elasticity of trabecular metal actually produces the physiological stresses onto the bone, and also it has got the similar mechanical properties similar to the bone, and it is highly porous, so it gives rise to a lot of ingrowth. We have used over 80 of these, and we have not had a single failure in any of these cases. So the philosophy of this concept is you create a one-piece construct by cementing the liner and eliminate the concern about the backside wear, and then you create a fit and let the host bone integrate. And this is now well established in a paper in 2013. Cup cage construct is being touted as one of the viable options for severe bone defects, and this is what I was telling about what we did for this failed reconstruction of acetabular fracture. This group from Madrid have reported the cup cage construct for severe acute fracture dislocations of the acetabulum. And just in the same way, to impress upon you in the discussion about the philosophy, this is a paper where they have done the same thing by cup in cup. So what they have done is they have put in a trabecular metal cup, and then they put another trabecular metal cup inside and cemented in place, and then put a liner. So the idea is that what you want to do is to reconstruct the bone defect using a material which is very similar to bone. Make sure that it grows into the bone. If it is not, reinforce it with another cup or a cage and then cement a liner in that. So it's a useful tool, it's quite versatile, it's highly successful, and as I have shown you, it is now having expanding indications. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Rajesh. Once again, I announce the name of Dr. Sumit Parya if he's here. Are you there? Please. Come over and give your talk on arthroscopic ACL reconstruction anatomical single bundle using quadrupled hamstring gracilis flap graft through enteromedial portal.
Good morning, everyone. Today I am talking about arthroscopic ACL reconstruction anatomical single bundle using quadruple hamstring gracilis flap graft through anterior modal portal, a critical prospective outcome analysis. As we all know, ACL injury is once considered with career ending, but today we have a lot of approaches to reconstruct it, and usually we are doing with the three main approaches, that is transtibial portal, anteromedial portal, femoral zig retrograde portal. AM portal technique allowed a more anatomical placement of the femoral tunnel on the lateral femoral condyle and led to better knee stability. By the use of AM portal technique, femoral tunnel created independently of tibial tunnel, and it is more in an anatomical position, provides more freedom to create a more horizontal tunnel. There are three criteria which define correctly placed tunnel in any ACL reconstructions, that are the avoidance of PCL impingement, which restores flexion while maintaining stability, and the avoidance of roof impingement, which restores extension while maintaining the stability, and the matching of the tension pattern of the graft to the intact ACL. In my study, I have taken the total number of patients was 42, and the average operating time was 50 minutes. And the inclusion criteria includes all skeletally mature patients with closed ACL tear, subacute or chronic, with or without stable meniscal injury. And we excluded all the bilateral ACL injuries, multiligamentous injuries, skeletally immature patient, and patient with restrictive pre-operative knee movements. Patients were evaluated with rollimeter, and that is for the mechanical stability and the LESM score for functional stability. In picture A, you can see the position of the rollimeter, and in picture B, we can see how you take the rollimeter reading. And all the patients were operated using quadruple hamstring autograft with endo button at femoral site and interference screw at tibial site. These are the intraoperative pictures, in which picture A shows the femoral tunnel in the relation to the PCL and femoral offset in place in picture B, and in picture 3 guide wire in the femoral offset MR and the tibial zig in C2, and endo button pull through in picture F, and picture E and picture F which shows the marking of the hamstring to be inserted. The results are the pre-off rollimeter reading, which was definitely improved with 7.5 mm to 2.06, and LESM score which is improved to 62 to 94. And the average femoral tunnel widening at 6 months was 8.61, and which is per of finding was 7.8 mm, and average femoral tunnel length was 35.285, and average femoral angle on coronal AP view was 51.16 degree. This is a picture which shows 6 month post-op X-ray, which shows the femoral tunnel angle on the tunnel's view, and the CT scan which shows the femoral graft angle and the tibial graft angle. Another patient. A lot of studies have been already done, but all study shows that the anteromedial portal technique provided better tunnel placement on the lateral femoral condyle in the coronal and sagittal planes, with an improvement in the rotational stability of the knee. Another paper which is already published on the knee surgery sports tomography, which shows that drilling the femoral tunnel through the anteromolar arthroscopy portal result in a radiographic femoral bone tunnel position, which is suggested to allow stabilization of both anterior tibial translation and rotational stability when using a single bundle reconstruction technique. The technique of ACL reconstruction using hamstring autograft with femoral fixation through AM portal provides an excellent rotatory and translational stability, and documented using rollimeter reading and LESM score. This is a post-operative picture of a patient, 1 week post-operative picture, showing the flexion till 90 degree and full extension of the knee. This is 6 month post-operative picture of a patient sitting cross-leg and doing squatting. Another patient doing the same. Now, most common age group in my study was 20 to 30 years, which constituted 73%, and associated meniscal injury was 23.8%. In comparison to the literature shows 50% associated meniscal injuries as documented in various studies by Daniel et al., Serbana or Devon et al. Outcome of the study objectively analyzed by using two methods, Lissom score and rollimeter scoring reading, and pre-op Lissom score improved from 62 to 94 in first year, and pre-op reading for comparable to the literature was 55 to 64 as shown by Chen et al. In their study published in 2004. Restoration of normal knee kinematics in functionally unstable ACL deficiencies cause prevention of osteoarthritis. Attention has returned to single bundle graft placed anatomically using the AM portal as a method of placing the femoral tunnel independent of the tibial tunnel. Now, this concludes the result of ACL reconstruction using quadruple hamstring autograft through AM portal were excellent both in terms of knee function and knee stability. There was a definitive statistical differences in rollimeter readings, especially in the initial period of post-operative follow-up. The difference in the Lissom score at 6 months, 12 months and 2 years continued to be significant, indicating that there is more to the patient evaluation with knee injuries than just anterior translation of tibia over femur. At last, ACL reconstruction done by AM portal technique by using hamstring graceless graft fixation by endo button and interference screw has an excellent clinical result as measured by Lissom score and rollimeter reading with no significant femoral widening, which usually affects the clinical outcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sumit. Now I think I've got 5 minutes. Do we have Dr. Chandrasekhar here? So you can ask 1 or 2 questions from any of the speakers. I really thank the speakers to keep them, to give a good talk and have the kept to time. Any questions from any one of the speakers, please? So that's it. Thank you very much. And I again congratulate all the speakers to have given a wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. This is just to start off this session as an introductory talk on pre-operative evaluation. What is included, I'm sure all of you do this, but there are some important questions to ask about medical history, especially diabetics patients who are usually having slightly immune suppressed status, hypertension patients usually bleed more, asthma and COPD patients have more incidences of venous thrombosis in these patients who have had previous heart disease, strokes, thyroid disease, or are steroid dependent. Especially medications. Anticoagulation is the patient already on anticoagulation. Most of these patients are old and already on clopidogrel or aspirin, and you have to take a medical opinion with regard to whether patient should continue on clopidogrel or warfarin or aspirin, which is the safest. Diabetic medications, insulin versus metformin, immunosuppressants, steroids, thyroxine, if patient is hypothyroid, and Parkinson medication if the patient has Parkinson's. What do you do in preoperative planning? You need to do a clinical and medical assessment, a local evaluation of that knee which you're going to operate, imaging, prophylactic antibiotics, anticoagulation protocol, and pain control. And finally, implant choice, which one you're going to put in. For local evaluation, you need to know what the soft tissue defects around the knee, and you might have to examine this knee under anesthesia if necessary. Vascular status to the limb. The role of routine screening by Doppler venography is controversial. Extensive mechanism, because that is what is going to help your knee to move. Preoperative range of motion, because that is how you're going to tell your patient how much of movement he is going to gain. And of course, imaging. Blood investigations, I think all of you are aware of. Radiology, what to look for actually in radiology. How the patellar tracks, the mechanical axis, the degree of deformity, femoral valgus, and the bony defects. And for these, you need to get a weight-bearing AP and lateral AP view, a lateral view, and a tangential patellar radiographs. It is very important to get full-length standing AP views, which is normally called a CT scanogram. Radiology, if patient has a pre-existing abdominal pathology, you need to get an USG. Color Doppler for both lower limbs, again this is controversial, and of course the CT scanogram. In this picture you can see a thrombus at the site which can lead to a problem. Radiographic evaluation, of course all of you are aware of standing full length AP views and standing AP views, and flexion extension laterals, tunnel view, and a sunrise view. Weight bearing x-rays can tell you about the extent of joint space narrowing, ligament stretch out, and subluxation of the femur on the tibia. When you've got these x-rays, what you need to do is to actually plan your axes on these x-rays for the femur as well as for the tibia. and then start templating. So define the patient's anatomy on AP X-rays, plan distal femoral resection and plan tibial resection also on AP X-rays. Posterior condyle and femoral component size are done on lateral X-rays, and ligament releases, again you go back to AP. And this is how you do it. It's very simple steps, 4 or 5. Define patient's anatomy by getting a anatomical axis of the femur as well as of the tibia. Do get a distal femoral angle and approximal tibial angle. Plan your distal femoral resection on AP X-rays. If you're getting a 6-degree, if you're doing a 6-degree valgus cut in the femur, then you obviously end up removing more bone from the medial side. Plan tibial resection on AP X-rays, that is at 90 degrees to the anatomical axis of the tibia. Posterior condylar resections, which are equal distal and posterior cuts, are planned. And then finally select the component size on lateral X-rays. If you're doing a varus knee, use smaller condyle to template, otherwise you risk overstuffing the joint. Ligament releases, of course, contracted medial structures will prevent appropriate tensioning of convex lateral ligaments. And if you plan properly, you can get a fairly good X-ray at the end of your surgery. Under anesthesia, check if the patient has laxity on the medial side, in whether you can manually correct the varus or not. When coming to a prosthesis, what is a suitable prosthesis? Only 3 things are necessary. Should be stable at the end of the procedure, should have least constraint inbuilt into the implant, and should be able to be inserted with minimal amount of bone resection. Lots of prosthetic types are there: condylers, mobile TKRs, unicondylar TKR, a hinged variety, and of course finally custom-based megaprosthetics. But the key aspects here are whether it can track patella properly, what is the contact area and conformity, whether you have intraoperative flexibility in this implant, what is the locking mechanism of the tibial tray, and is it patient-specific. As regards materials, the construction material must be biocompatible, must be able to duplicate the knee structures, and be able to retain their length. Most of the metal parts of the implant are made of titanium or cobalt chrome, but there are companies which have brought out other materials, like for example nickel chrome alloys, which are actually tough, but they tend to roughen and scratch over time. And ceramicized metals, which are supposed to be more durable, with reduced rate of polythene wear, but this has not been proven yet. Fixation of this thing, whether cemented or cementless. Most of us do cemented knee.